They came with cannons. They came with empire. But this mountain would never bow.
On this night, a king did not prepare for survival.
The empire that claimed to rule the world bowed its head in shame before an African king.
Was this victory, or the first whisper of empire's greatest fear?
The night was black, the wind sharp against the stone walls of Thaba Bosio, the mountain of the night. From below, campfires flickered like stars scattered across the valley. Thousands of British soldiers, confident in their empire's unstoppable power, prepared to crush a king they considered nothing more than a native chief. They carried rifles, cannons, and the arrogance of conquest. They believed the mountain would fall before dawn, but the mountain belonged to Moshoeshoe. Perched high on his stronghold, the king of the Basotho had watched empires advance and retreat, had outwitted enemies far larger than his own people. Tonight, as the British tightened their noose, he prepared something far more devastating than brute force. He had patience. He had terrain. He had the will to humiliate the empire that dared to underestimate him. By morning, the British would not find victory but humiliation, bodies scattered, cannons abandoned, retreat echoing down the valley. How did a king with fewer weapons, fewer soldiers, and no empire at his back break the pride of the most powerful empire on earth? What did the British see on that mountain that made them turn and run? This is the untold story of King Moshoeshoe, the African king who bent the British Empire to its knees. In the early 19th century, southern Africa was in chaos. The rise of the Zulu under Shaka had sent waves of violence rippling across the region, in a period remembered as the Mfecane, the crushing. Communities scattered, villages burned, and survival became a matter of cunning as much as strength. Amid this turmoil rose Moshoeshoe. Born in 1786 in the foothills of what is now Lesotho, he was not a warrior king in the traditional sense. He was a strategist, a unifier. He understood that power was not only measured in spears or guns, but in loyalty, diplomacy, and vision. By his 30s, Moshoeshoe had gathered together a fragmented people, offering them protection atop a fortress plateau called Thaba Bosio. The mountain was both symbolic and practical. Its cliffs sheer, its summit broad, its defenses nearly impenetrable. From this stronghold, Moshoeshoe built the Basotho nation, welding together refugees and survivors into something greater than themselves. But survival came at a cost. White settlers, known as Boers, expanded from the Cape Colony, claiming land and clashing with the Basotho. Then came missionaries, traders, and eventually the British Empire itself, with its endless hunger for territory. To the British, Moshoeshoe was an obstacle, an African ruler standing in the way of imperial expansion. To his people he was something more, a shield, a father, a strategist whose words carried as much power as his warriors' spears. For years he balanced peace and war with a master's touch. He invited missionaries to teach writing and Christianity, strengthening his nation's diplomacy. He negotiated treaties to buy time, even as his warriors clashed with Boer commandos. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, Moshoeshoe understood one truth: the empire would come for him. And when it did, Thaba Bosio would either stand as the last free mountain or crumble beneath the weight of the British Empire. The storm began with land. British authorities in the Cape sought to redraw borders, slicing into Basotho territory with arrogant confidence. When Moshoeshoe protested, they branded him a troublemaker. Skirmishes broke out. Basotho cattle raided, British patrols ambushed. Each clash escalated the tension. By the 1850s, Moshoeshoe's name carried both respect and fear. To settlers, he was a cunning obstacle. To Africans across the region, he was proof that resistance was possible. But resistance was costly. British firepower was unmatched. Cannons roared, rifles cracked, and villages burned. The Basotho fought bravely, but the imbalance of weapons was clear. Each year, pressure mounted. Finally, in 1852, the British decided to end the problem once and for all. They assembled a massive force, nearly 3,000 troops, armed with artillery, seasoned officers, and the confidence of empire. Their goal: march on Thaba Bosio, crush Moshoeshoe, and shatter Basotho resistance. From their campfires below the mountain, soldiers sang and boasted of their coming victory. To them, the Basotho were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. A king in a mountain fortress was no match for the British lion, but Moshoeshoe had no intention of meeting them in open battle. He had studied their arrogance, their discipline, and their flaws. He knew that terrain was his greatest ally. The mountain paths were steep, narrow, and treacherous. A single mistake could turn an advancing column into a slaughtered mob. As dawn broke, the British columns began to climb. Step by step, their neat formations dissolved into chaos. Basotho warriors, hidden behind rocks and ridges, unleashed a storm of spears and musket fire. Shouts turned to screams as soldiers tumbled from cliffs. Cannons meant to batter walls were useless against the vast open heights. By midday, the unstoppable British force was in retreat. Panic spread faster than orders. Officers fell, horses bolted. What had begun as a march of triumph dissolved into a desperate scramble for survival. And from the summit of Thaba Bosio, Moshoeshoe watched, calm and deliberate. He had struck not only their bodies but their pride. But the humiliation was not yet complete. Moshoeshoe had one more move to play. The retreat should have ended in slaughter. Trapped in ravines, disorganized, their supplies scattered, the British were vulnerable. Basotho warriors pressed the attack, seizing weapons and supplies. The empire teetered on the edge of disaster. Yet at the very height of his victory, Moshoeshoe did something few expected. He pulled back his warriors and sent a letter. Addressed to the British commander, it was both humble and cutting. Moshoeshoe acknowledged the suffering of war, expressed sorrow for the bloodshed, and offered peace. But beneath the politeness, the message was unmistakable. You came to break me, and I remain unbroken. You came to humiliate me, and it is you who crawl away from my mountain. For the British, it was salt in the wound. They had suffered heavy losses, failed to take the mountain, and now had to accept peace on Moshoeshoe's terms. Newspapers in the Cape seethed. Officers licked their wounds. The empire, so accustomed to easy conquest, had been humbled by an African king. For the Basotho, it was a triumph etched into memory. Thaba Bosio was no longer just a fortress. It was sacred ground, proof that unity and cunning could outwit empire. Moshoeshoe's choice to spare the British rather than annihilate them added to his legend. He was not only a warrior king, but a ruler of vision, one who understood that survival sometimes meant restraint. And so, in 1852, the British marched away, not victorious but humiliated. The Battle of Thaba Bosio was not the end of the story. Moshoeshoe would continue to defend his people for decades, facing renewed British campaigns and Boer incursions. Yet his greatest weapon remained the same: strategy. He knew when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to bend without breaking. At the time of his death in 1870, Moshoeshoe had preserved his nation's identity against impossible odds. While many African kingdoms fell to colonial conquest, Lesotho remained intact, recognized as a distinct territory. His legacy endured not only in borders, but in memory, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, resistance was possible. For the British Empire, Thaba Bosio was a scar. It proved that arrogance could be turned against them, that their soldiers could bleed and retreat, that an African king could force them into humility. And yet, history often buries such stories. Moshoeshoe is rarely remembered alongside the great resistors of empire, his name overshadowed by narratives of European dominance. But the mountain still stands, and with it the memory of a king who refused to bow. The question remains, was Moshoeshoe simply a brilliant survivor in a brutal age? Or was his defiance the spark of something larger, a quiet warning to empire, that no conquest is ever absolute? Perhaps the true humiliation of the British was not the defeat itself, but the survival of a people they believed would vanish. They thought no African king could resist the empire, but on the Mountain of the Night, the British learned humiliation. This is the forgotten true story of King Moshoeshoe, the strategist who turned arrogance into defeat and built a nation from the ashes of war. Stay until the end to uncover how he humiliated the most powerful empire on earth.